my name is Pooja DiGiovanna. I am the Assistant Director at the Davenport Institute, and it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to this panel event in honor of Black History Month, Conversations with Black Leaders in Local Government. We are very, very blessed to have a great group here as speakers. I will say that they are a very accomplished group. So we, in the interest of time, will not be reading all bios, but we're dropping the link into the chat for all of our speakers, and we encourage you to learn more about them. Our panel today will be moderated by Pat Martel, who is the ICMA West Coast Regional Director and former City Manager of Daly City. Our panelists include Troy Brown, former ICMA President, City Manager of Moorpark, Artie Fields, City Manager of the City of Inglewood, Ingrid Hardy, Assistant City Manager of Thousand Oaks, and Kurt Wilson, Executive Director of Western Riverside Council of Governments. Again, these are just their current roles at the moment. They're a very accomplished group, and we encourage you to read more about them in the speaker bio that's being dropped. My name is, as I said, my name is Pooja. If you have any tech issues as participants, please feel free to send me a direct message. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator, Pat Martel, to take it away.
Thank you very much, Pooja. Thank you all for joining us today for this important event. You know, a continued engagement with history is vital as it helps to give context to the present. Black History Month is an opportunity to understand Black histories, going beyond stories of racism and slavery to spotlight Black achievement. It provides us an opportunity to give visibility to people and organizations who are creating change. And our panelists today are certainly change agents, each in their own individual rights. So let's get to their career journeys and personal stories and history. So all of you I know pretty well, with maybe the exception of Ingrid, but I know her background. And so I know the impact that you've all had in your careers so far. And I'm sure there are many more contributions that you will make. But I'd like to start with each of you sharing with us what I think is common in our profession, that people who enter public service, they do so because they want to make a difference. So I'd like for you to share with us, starting with Kurt. Why did you enter the profession? Was it to make a difference? And how did that occur?
Well, thanks, Pat. So, well, first, thanks for having me. It's great to be on this panel, and I can say it's very rare to be on a panel with two former ICMA presidents. So I'm glad to be in good company here. So, you know, why did I start? I mean, you know, in the short version, I needed a job, but really, what happened for me is I wanted something. I didn't see myself sort of doing some of the what I would call the boring jobs, the stuff that would give me a paycheck and do all that stuff. That really wasn't going to do it for me. So I thought I was on my way to med school. I was on my way to med school. And then I ended up having health issues. And after that whole experience, I didn't want anything to do with hospitals and all that sort of thing. So I found myself sitting there saying, okay, well, now what am I going to do? I kind of, you know, did all this work and I thought I was going this direction. So once that didn't happen, I sort of fumbled into it just sort of by accident because I was never exposed to it before. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what the opportunities were. And the more time I got to spend in it, the more I started to think, I would really like this, although I wasn't convinced early on that I could actually do it or that I could actually figure out a way to land myself there. But ultimately I did, and I never looked back.
Okay. So Troy Brown, can you tell us how and why your journey began?
You're on mute.
You need to unmute.
This is my first Zoom meeting, apparently. Good morning, Pat. I want to sort of echo what Kurt said. I'm just glad to be here among this panel. What a distinguished group of folks, and it's really an honor to be here with you. Similar to Kurt, I sort of fell into it. I'm not from California. I'm a transplant. So my story, actually, my journey began back in southeastern Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia. And all my friends were graduating high school, and I was really not a great student at the time. So the only thing I knew I wanted to do when I got out of high school was get out of high school. So I came to California. My dad actually had a job set up for me at UPS. You know, coming from a really small town in southeastern Pennsylvania, working a job like UPS back then was great. And UPS was actually good to me. I was had full benefits there. I was part-time, so I only worked from 6 until 10. So that afforded me the opportunity to do different things during the day. When I got into local government, I actually applied as a recreation leader. I didn't even know what a recreation leader was. But I was the person that was doing facility reservation at parks for the city of Santa Clarita. And, you know, I don't know what it was about that. I mean, there was two things. One, the work that I was doing actually made me feel good because I would go out into the parks and see people having fun or accomplishing film shoots or whatever. And I felt like I had my fingerprints on that. And that joy of sort of having an impact on something bigger than me was really, really, really appealing to me. I really enjoyed that part of the job. And then the other part of it was the city was growing so quickly. I really had the opportunity to do anything I want. And I had never been in a scenario like that. When I thought about working for cities, I thought about police or fire. But in Parks and Recreation, I could do anything. And I love the freedom of experimenting in that local government space. And I just have been building on it ever since. And just never looked back.
Thanks, Troy. Artie, what about you? Was your career journey, was it strategic or did it happen out of other circumstances?
Well, just like Kurt and Troy, this was not where I planned my career to be in. I was a psychology major in school, and after being a counselor on campus for a couple of years, I decided that I don't want to spend my life listening to people's problems like that, at that level. So I went to a counselor myself, an academic counselor, and said, here I'm about to graduate. I thought I was going to graduate school in psychology, but I don't want to do that anymore. And she walked me through it. She said, well, what jobs have you had? And, you know, what do you like? And so I said, well, when I was in high school and part of college, I was an orderly at a hospital, and I liked the hospital environment. So she said, have you heard of hospital administration? I said, no. Well, she said, there's the person in charge of the hospital, administrator. And so I said, when she said, we have a program here at USC called, you know, public administration, but they have a specialty in hospital administration. So that's what I was going to do. And then my first internship opportunity I got was with the city of Beverly Hills, then Manhattan Beach, and then Pasadena. And I was off and running in the local government. So it was just something that just kind of happened. It wasn't by plan. And it was the best choice I could have made to just go with the opportunities that came before me.
Thanks for that, Artie. So Ingrid, you in your career, you've probably had more role models than Kurt and Artie and Troy and I had when we started in the profession. So did that impact your choice of public service in any way?
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, thank you for being here today, Pat. It's a pleasure to actually be on this panel with you as well as the others here today. I actually come from a family of service. So I had a mom who worked in local government and my dad worked for labor unions. And so service was instilled in us at a very young age. I did enter into college thinking I wanted to become an attorney, much like most of the undergraduates. And I found myself like wanting to make a difference. And I started out in nonprofit sector and then had an opportunity to work for the city of LA. And I realized immediately that local government was a place where I could make a tangible difference. And so through pursuing my graduate degree in public administration, I had an opportunity to work for the city of Santa Clarita. And much like Troy's experience, I had an opportunity to touch so many different areas of local government, and the rest is history.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. You know, I share in common with Troy starting out in recreation. So I know that's a great area to start if you want to get your foot in the door. An exciting one and fun too.
Best job I ever had.
That's what I always say too, Troy. So let's talk about some of the challenges that you have faced during your career journeys. As I mentioned, probably for you three gentlemen, there were fewer role models in terms of people of color for you to look to. Black leaders at the time. There were, but probably fewer than today. Ingrid's experience was much different, I'm sure. So how did that affect your career journey? And were there challenges that you faced in advancing in your careers? Kurt, how about you?
Sure. So I think that the biggest thing was it took a while for me to sort of grasp things. So I've always been well aware of my history, with a particular interest around sort of the 1960s. So I could sort of look at where I was and what my situation was compared to the 1960s and look at it and say, you know what, things are so much better for me. That's fantastic. And I could see sort of the evolution of things happening. But it took me a while to realize that people and institutions change at different paces. So, and by that I mean there were folks around, so I could look around and see, people who looked like me who would hold these cool positions and do all these different things. And I'd say, man, well, I want to go do that stuff. I didn't start off in recreation, not because I didn't think it was a cool job, but because I couldn't get in. So all the regular paths to get into this career profession, the institution wasn't there for me. So I couldn't get over that hump. There were great people. There were people who looked like me. There were people who, were at high levels, and were supportive of the concept. And I would look at that and think, well, look, if the mayor or whoever it is there, then there must be something wrong with me if I can't get in there. And I sort of discounted some of the racial things that were going on at the time. And then finally, I realized that it's one thing for the person at the top or some significant figurehead to sort of have evolved. It's something different for the rest of the organization to have evolved. So for me, once I realized that, then I wasn't going to quit. So it just taught me that I couldn't go the regular path with the normal entry level stuff that I was supposed to do. So instead, I ran for city council in my 20s. And once I was on the council, that created a whole new set of environments for me. But it took me a minute to learn that lesson and realize that just having an advocate there or a person in a position of power is not the same as the organization making that change.
So Artie, I'm sure that in your career, you've seen our profession evolve a great deal, as I have, I'm sure Troy has. But what challenges did you face as you attempted to advance in your career?
Well, I have to say I was blessed from the time I started in this career because I had some wonderful people who helped me create a roadmap for success. I started out, like I said, in Beverly Hills and Manhattan Beach, and in those communities, there weren't a lot of people like me, but there were people there who wanted to see me succeed and help me out a great deal. When I got to Pasadena, it was a predominantly Black organization there at the time. And there were a lot of folks there who, again, wanted to help me. And I remember, I was in graduate school in my 20s, and the only nice clothes I had were clothes that I wore out to the nightclubs. So I would come into City Hall, with my little skinny tie and my little shiny pants and all that, because that's all I had to dress up in. And so I remember in the city manager's office, I was told later that one of the ladies told a Black gentleman in the office, you need to mentor Artie.
Mm-hmm.
That person pulled me aside and kind of helped me figure out the dress and how to act and and became my life mentor, basically. And was really important for my career path. But, the only challenge I had was kind of self-made, because I had this clear roadmap as to where I want to go and how long I need to be in each position. I moved up very quickly and I was young. And so some people did not give me all the credit because they thought, oh, you're young, you're new, you don't know. And then there might have been people who, outside of the people who are non-Black who were supporting me, who maybe looking on thought, why is he getting all these opportunities? Why are he's getting all this attention and assistance? And maybe they could have felt like, there was, some resentment because I was Black. I don't know. But I never even thought about all that stuff. I grew up in a neighborhood where I was one of the only Black folks around. So it was kind of common for me to be in environments where you don't see people that look like you. So I would just say the only challenge I had was just moving up quickly, and then two, you have to prove yourself every time. Every new job you get, you have to prove yourself that you can do it. So proving myself to folks, over and over. But I took it as a welcome challenge to do that. So it was a really good, helpful experience for me to have to go through and not get comfortable in any organization and move up as quickly as I did.
So being Black is, I'm certain, was a challenge, one that I experienced in organizations that I worked in, and looked around and saw how people of color did not advance as quickly unless you had a mentor who saw something in you that you didn't even see in yourself.
Right.
But Ingrid, I know it's been even more difficult for women to advance in our profession to the executive level. So how, as a Black woman, have you faced challenges in your career journey, and what did you do to address those challenges?
Yes, absolutely. The intersectionality of race and gender in the workplace has certainly been a challenge. And it's like that double minority status of being Black and also being a woman. And, when I started out my career and I moved from a large organization to a smaller organization, I quickly realized that city management was a goal for me and where I wanted to be. And I didn't really see many women at the time in city management positions or in executive positions. And it was important for me to participate in organizations like ICMA-CM and ICMA and to really expand my network. And so in expanding that network, I was able to tap into women who did hold executive positions, be it department heads or city managers, and I found a professional mentor, someone who helped guide me and, help me create that roadmap for my career. I have shared this on previous panels, and I'm going to share it again today. Whether or not Troy would like to take credit for this or not. Informally, I had actually reached out to Troy, and I was working on my first council agenda report, and he wanted to make a good impression. And Troy was our management analyst for the recreation department. And he took the time to walk me through it, to coach and guide me. And whether or not he did that because, we're the same color, because we're, two Black people in the same organization, or maybe it's a combination of the two, just because it's who he is. It's like seizing those important moments like that to help someone who has aspirations and to guide them along the way. And so I've latched on to individuals that are invested in my career growth to help me sort of navigate these challenges. And I also extend that same opportunity to others today.
Thank you for that, Ingrid. Well, Troy, it is no doubt that you are a great mentor for Ingrid, and I know hundreds of other young rising stars that you have mentored. So did you develop that mentorship mentality because you were mentored as you began to advance in your career?
I think so, Pat. I mean, if I look back on it, I think so. It's always been, I don't know, it's always been part of my DNA of who I am. I'm a middle child. So I've been, I had to learn to navigate a lot of things as a child and try and find a middle ground there. And I always brought joy out of helping people. For me, I think the question as it was posed, I think they're sort of mutually exclusive, because I think there's one issue related to your ethnic diversity and Blackness and how that shapes you. And then there's the tack that I took, which is, I'm sure I've run into it. I'm sure throughout the course of my career, I've run into instances where the color of my skin had an impact on my career trajectory. I never really looked at it that way because I can't change that. I wake up every morning and I'm a Black man no matter what I do. So that comes with it its own burden, right? That you need to sort of be better than everyone else, that you sort of gotta, and I really have to sort of let all that go. And I was fortunate to be around some great mentors and to really focus myself on how can I be the best individual that I am, irrespective of everything else.
Mhm.
And that is what has really pushed me and shaped me. For me, the biggest challenge that I've had in progressing throughout this career, I didn't even realize it was a challenge at the time. I realized it later in life, but it was I wasn't like Artie. I didn't have the ability to sort of come up fast. I wanted to learn a lot, and I really enjoyed learning. And when I stopped learning, I felt like I was getting antsy and it was time to move on. So I went from Santa Clarita, had a very young child there, married young there, moved out to Riverside, was only there for a short period of time in a different environment where it was really foreign to me. Then I moved up to Northern California and was there for 5 years in Elk Grove, and then 5 years in Livermore, and then 3 years in the city of Tracy. Now I'm back in the city of Moorpark. If you look back on all of that, that has an impact on your personal life, right? I mean, that has a real impact on your family. There's a real impact on my partner's career trajectory and what she was trying to get done. So that, we started to navigate that, frankly, after we almost hit a wall in our personal life. And it's like, we got to change everything here. So we sat down and had conversations about what it meant to be in this profession, potentially moving around from city to city, and what the sideboards were around that and how we were going to do that, or whether or not we were going to do that. And I think once I was able to reconcile that, it made the job part a lot easier. But, sitting there getting antsy and saying, if you don't give me what I need, I'm going to leave. That is easier said than done. But it's something that we sacrifice as part of this profession, because you may not end up in the same city that you started in. And there's impacts to that, and you don't sort of think about it until you're in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So one of the things that I think everyone who sees successful leaders, not just Black leaders, but leaders like all of you want to know is, what do you perceive as the impact that you have had on the profession? What do you individually think that you have contributed and really can say, I think I had an impact in this way, however large or small? I think this is what my impact to date has been. Let's start with Artie on that question.
So there's a lot. One thing that comes to my mind is that because there are not that many African Americans in the local government arena where I was working and where I've come up, I've always looked for opportunities to attract and mentor young Black professionals. And I think as a professional administrator, that's one of the things I believe is my greatest impact, because those young people are now in local government being very successful. And so other than that, I've also been in organizations where I've been able to have the opportunity to be a liaison between the Black community and City Hall. People felt like they were ignored, disenfranchised, not listened to, or whatever it might be. Being in a position where I could reach out to those folks, like in Pasadena, we had the Northwest Commission, an area of the Pasadena that was neglected. It was predominantly Black and Hispanic. And I think that kind of formed my attention to going into governments and looking for the people who are unheard in every community. And so when I look back and I think of the young Black folks that I've mentored who are now successful in local government, and the communities within a city that are now engaged where they weren't when I got there, those are things that give me the most pride. But I'll also say, if you talk to anybody who's worked for me, they know that I'm a tree hugger. So I make sure I will chain myself to a tree before Public Works cuts down a tree. So in every city that I've worked in, it's greener after I left. I make sure that hundreds of trees were planted in every city that I've worked. And that's because when I worked in Pomona, one of my roles was to be the Earth Day coordinator. And that just expanded my knowledge about what it means to be, to live on this earth and how we have to protect our natural resources. So those are the three things that come to mind first.
Thank you for that, Artie. So Dr. Wilson, as an educator and a local government leader, which arena or do you feel like you've had the greatest impact, or maybe it's equal? And what impact is it that you feel that you've had?
So I think it's both. So I think like on paper, I think for all of us, people would see the impact as sort of, the first Black to do this, the second Black to do that, because almost every position every one of us has had, we've
Your
been
part.
the first.
Right.
So we've sort of done that. And, Troy talked before about sort of the burden of Blackness. You're the representative of your entire race. So everything you do means, you've got that big role. But I think in terms of impact, I think most of us, probably all of us, sort of view it like we don't go into it saying, hey, I only want to have an impact on people who look like me. I think instead what we do is we try to have an impact on the global environment, the broader realm, the profession, doing some of those sorts of things. And the true impact among people who look like us is then being able to see somebody doing all those things, in a way that's not exclusionary, that we open those doors, we do some of those things. We've had people who have worked for us who've now gone on to be city managers. And we take great pride in that. That's a big deal. That's sort of how our legacy goes on. So in some ways, that's probably our biggest impact, because like the people who used to work for me who are now city managers are clearly on a path to be a far better city manager than I ever was. So I'm just going to take credit for the things that they go on to do, because I think they're heading to do those things. But as we go forward and we sort of navigate in this complex world, there are people who look like us who are sitting in the background, and we don't see them until they come up to us years later at a conference and say, hey, by the way, I watched when you did this, or I appreciate when you did so-and-so. I think that's really the impact we have, because we don't have the luxury of segregating out little components of our life. So we can focus on the bigger piece, and those individual groups, they're watching. And when they see us navigate in that bigger world and do some of those things, it gives them some ideas of what to do or not to do, or sort of reinforces the concept that it really is possible. So I think the true impact is sort of the legacy that we're able to leave, and then the vantage point that we're able to give to people who are trying to figure things out themselves.
Kurt, you've raised a couple of interesting points, and it recalls an ethics session, which I was involved in recently, where a Black female manager during the Q&A raised an issue about being, as you described, the first, and the big deal that was being made about it in the local press in her community, and she took exception to it. And so I want to kind of explore that idea with all of you. She took exception and said, I don't seek any job as the first Black female manager. I seek the job to be the next city manager.
Right.
And she said, and I really objected to the press wanting to do a story about me being the first Black female manager, because I felt like ethically it was contrary to my belief that my job is to serve the best interests of all the people. All of us know the tenets of the ICMA code. And so she said, I feel like that's contrary if I identify myself that way, because people may believe that I'm only there to serve the Black community. So Ingrid, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts about the kind of impact that you can have if you're identified from the very beginning in a certain way?
Yeah, I actually like the words that you shared in terms of, being the first, and that our role is not only to our role is to have an impact on the entire community. Mm-hmm. That is the job. That's what we sign up for as city managers. So I would certainly take exception to that as well. I would also take exception to that because I would like to believe, and I do believe, that I am in this seat because of the knowledge, skills, and experience that I bring to this position. Mm-hmm. And that, I don't want others to see me as some affirmative action hire. Oh, she's the first, assistant, a Black assistant city manager in Thousand Oaks because of the color of her skin. No, I'm in this role because I've worked my butt off all of these years. I'm educated, and I'm well prepared for the position that I'm in. In terms of the impact also that I believe I have, and the responsibility that I have to this profession, is to coach and to mentor others. I am deeply committed to that. And again, through participation in different organizations, professional organizations, as well as the organizations in which I've served. I have seen individuals go on to grow in their professional careers, and there's nothing more rewarding than that. I think indirectly, the impact that I have is for someone to see a Black person in a predominantly white community doing a good job in this role, bringing forth significant policy change and items before the council, and handling that in the most professional way, regardless of the color of my skin. And then lastly, I'll just say that I think one of the impacts that we can all have as well, and it is important, it's been important for me throughout my career, is to provide a safe space for conversations for people of color, because there are, that we talked about the burden of Blackness, and sometimes you need to be able to connect with someone that understands your walk and your journey. And it's not meant to exclude others, but it's just meant to kind of help move us along amongst some of the challenges that come with being the only in a room or the first in an organization.
So Troy, since you raised that issue initially about the burden of Blackness, has that affected your ability to make an impact in the communities where you have worked? Or have you just viewed yourself as the next city manager and not the next or the first Black manager?
I've always viewed myself as the next city manager. I don't think, well, maybe to some level, right? Like on an innate level within me, I can remember when I was a child that, back in the late 60s, early 70s, there was this whole government sort of renaissance that was happening as part of the civil rights movement. A lot of big policy decisions being made by then. And there was a clear feeling that there was a power struggle of us and them as it related to local government. And when I got into local government, I realized pretty quickly that local government is the most relevant level of government that you have in your life. It's the one that matters the most. If you turn on the water and something weird comes out of it, that's a problem. If you turn on a light switch and the lights don't work, that's a problem, right? So those are real life problems that I don't care what color of your skin is, if that's an issue, you need to have it resolved. So I wanted to sort of create an environment to ensure that everybody in every community that I've ever worked for walked out of there thinking like, okay, they're actually listening to what I'm saying at City Hall. I feel like that's the greatest impact that I've had. I could talk about miles of roads paved and things that we built, but at the end of the day, if people feel like the city, the local government that they have is working for them and not against them, irrespective of whether or not we're able to agree on our problems, then that to me is a success. Because that's how I want people of all races, genders, creeds, whatever it is, your local government's here for you. And that's really, really an important part of breaking down some of the systematic things that we've seen happen over time in other government institutions. But that's not part of any institution that I've ever worked for. And I think that folks truly feel like, and it's reflective in our citizen surveys that they do, they truly feel like the governments that I have been a part of have been more accessible to them, have been more transparent in what they're doing, and actually feel like it's a place where we can get problems solved. So that's real high level, the great impact that I feel like I've had. But it's really important because if it doesn't work and it's working for a segment or a certain strata of the population, that's your government isn't working. We all pay the same amount of taxes. I don't care who you are. So your government should be there to work for you. And I feel like I've had a really solid impact on that in every position I've ever been in any organization.
So do you all think that your personal journeys have enabled you to develop a level of empathy for the people that you serve that transcends color or class or all of the issues that segregate communities within a community? And how has that empathy allowed you to have greater impact on the communities that you serve? Artie, what about you?
Oh, I was thinking as you were talking, and I don't know. I think as Black people as a whole, you know, we're compassionate, we're inclusive, we're all the things that, you know, everybody, no matter what color you are, if you feel like you're disenfranchised or something, we want to help everybody. You know, we don't have a history of not wanting to be included and allow everybody to come to the table. So I think that background and that knowledge in our history has just kind of been part of my DNA that said, look, you know, I'm going to help everybody no matter what color they are. And I'm going to bring everybody into the fold as much as I can. And so that's kind of how I've looked at it. You know, can you remind me of the question specifically?
It was about developing empathy, and does that
Right,
allow
right.
you to serve the community without?
Right, yes. Right. So I think my background has definitely, my DNA is empathetic and sensitive to the needs of everybody. And to the degree, though, that I can help those folks who have been disenfranchised, you know, I really go out my way to help those people who are on the outskirts of local government, you know, and I find real value and appreciation for being able to pull people in who might have thought that, you know, the government was not here to serve me, you know.
So I guess, Artie, that psychology background did help in dealing with people's problems, huh?
It definitely did. Let me tell you, I listened to, as all of us, you know, you have to listen to people's problems and issues, and, you know, whether or not it's from the community or from your staff. And you just have to have it can't be a burden to do that. You have to just have it in you that where you want to listen, you want to help people. And so it's really it's not counseling on a professional level, but there is some value to being able to listen to people's problems and help them resolve them and be in a position to provide answers to them too.
So, you know, we talk about in the profession the need as leaders to display a high level of emotional intelligence. And so empathy is part of that. Would you agree, Ingrid? And how has that affected your ability to serve your community in an equitable way?
Absolutely. And, you know, service, empathy, it like underpins what we do, right, as public servants. And I think for me, the value of being an empathetic and compassionate person is the ability to listen, which is, and to take time and to take time to do that with a variety of stakeholders. So whether or not there's like a major policy decision in front of the city council or some new program that is being implemented, being able to work with all segments of the community, regardless of your background, regardless of your race, regardless of, you know, what community or part of the community you live in. People know when you care, they can read you. And to show up authentically and to say, I am here representing your city, your local government, and I'm here to listen to you, to hear what your concerns are, is like, to me, it's one of the most valuable characteristics that we can bring to this position and to the profession.
You know, you raised an issue that one of my mentors told me a long time ago, is that people need to know that you care before they care about what you know. And
I love that.
And I've always carried that with me because I think it's so true. So Kurt, for you, you are a very empathetic person. I know in dealing with you over the years. So how has that empathy, even with the challenges you face, as a community leader in local government? How are you able to muster that empathy to serve the best interests of all the people, even when there are great challenges?
I think first, yes, I do think of myself as an empathetic person. You know, we sort of draw on our own experiences and that sort of thing. But I hold a little bit of a distinction. So when it comes to issues, say around Black people, I've lived it, I understand it, it's innate to me. So 5 years from now, I'm going to be just as passionate. There we go. As a husband and a father, where two of my children happen to be daughters, I care a lot about women's issues. So in that, but they're not the same. So I care a lot about women's issues. I'm empathetic toward it, but I've never walked that walk. So I think there's sort of a distinction for me about the empathy. So there's some things like I get it, but if I haven't actually walked in your shoes and lived that experience, my role is different. And as I'm thinking of solutions or trying to figure things out, I think it's important for me to recognize the difference between those two roles. So we see a lot of times, you know, in social justice issues around Black people, you know, we have sort of the people who have the lived experience sort of on one side. They are, you know, they're in it. They've dealt with it for a long time. They're passionate. They're all set. And we have another group of people who are empathetic who say, "Look, I want to be helpful, but I think that role is very different." And then we have a third group, which is people who sort of jumped in out of passion. They became aware of something, you know, that sort of offended their senses, and they say, "This is horrible. We need to do something." And that's a group filled on passion. Those three groups aren't in the same place. So my role on each issue may change. The folks who are there for passion, they make fantastic allies. But sometimes those allies are not there for the long haul. So as I'm trying to figure out what that solution is to that problem, I need to figure out not only where I am, but where those other people are, because I can't expect somebody who's there because they saw a video and, oh my goodness, the world must change. Here we go. I know 6 months from now, they're going to be off to something else. One of the headlines today is about Ukraine, how, you know, a year ago, it was, oh my goodness, this is such a big deal. And now they've done a new study and suddenly it's no longer such a big deal for people. So we have these different roles. And I think it's important for us to know sort of where we fit. And no matter how great we are and how empathetic and how smart we think we are, you know, we're sort of limited to our own little world, and we have sometimes just an ally role. But I think for me, the best way I can help is knowing which box I fit in. And as I'm figuring out a solution, figuring out where other people fit. So I design a solution based on what I really have to work with.
Thank you for that, Kurt. You know, societal events in the last few years have really raised a number of issues for all leaders in local government, but particularly for Black leaders in terms of facing community issues with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Troy, I know you have been a major leader among our ICMA community in talking about the challenges we face as a society and in our communities around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what role at the local level? I know what you've done at the international level as the leader of ICMA, but at the local level, what role do you feel is appropriate for you to play in those conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion?
You know, Pat, I was listening to the conversation about empathy, and I tried to come up with examples of where I've used this, and I'll talk a little bit about it. But here's to me is the role. I would never want to be characterized as, you know, the Black city manager. We don't characterize the white city managers that way, so why would we characterize me as the Black city manager? I just want to be seen as the city manager. But I'll say this: does the color of my skin give me the ability to engage in conversations that my white, female, or otherwise other counterparts may have challenges? 100%, 100%. I recall an instance where there was, in a community that I worked for, there was a lot of racial tensions between two groups of day laborers. One's from Guatemala, versus ones from other parts of Mexico, and they weren't getting along with each other at all. The city manager assigned me to sit down and talk with these folks, and I didn't have an issue with it. And I realized then that he was sending me there because of the color of my skin, 100%, because he knew within himself, as difficult as these conversations are, and they're hard conversations to have, sending him someone that doesn't necessarily look like them makes that conversation even harder sometimes, because people can feel like you have no idea what I'm talking about. You haven't lived it. So I think the role that I've certainly taken advantage of is being able to navigate some of those conversations. I will say this, so I don't want to seem any disparaging at all. I think there are white people or people of all genders and colors that can navigate those conversations. But a lot of the time, because of the layers of difficulty behind these embedded conversations, sometimes it matters who walks in the door. It really does. That's creating an environment where people feel safe having that conversation is important. And I think at the local government level, irrespective of what your color of your skin is, it's up to us to create an environment where some of these difficult conversations can come out so that you can vet the issues on both sides of the ledger. And I feel like that because of the color of my skin, it's actually enabled me to do that in situations where it may be difficult for other groups or other individuals to do that. And I felt like I've at least opened the doors of that and really enabled some of those difficult conversations to happen. A lot of that is just who we are as human beings. We could unpack that for days, but at least being able to sort of create an environment where people can feel like, oh, just like Kurt said, no, I actually grew up Black. I've been persecuted against. So tell me about that. Sometimes people feel a bit easier talking to me about that, and I embrace that. I really want to hear that, and I really want to empathize and try and understand how to impact that. So I've really embraced those opportunities.
Ingrid, what have those opportunities been provided to you to be able to have an impact and lead efforts around DEI in your community? And do you feel that that's an appropriate role?
Sure. So much like what Troy just shared, is being able to navigate conversations with the community after 2020 and just seeing the amount of concern and unrest and requests to our city council to do something, right? As it relates to racism, to police brutality, everyone's calling on their community. They, want to see some level of change, and Thousand Oaks was no different in that regard. And so being able to sit at the table with people that have concerns, to hear them out. I talked about listening earlier, showing up as my full authentic self. That certainly is part of the role that I play. Also, as the chief operations officer of the organization, ensuring that we're looking internally and what are we doing as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and creating an environment where employees feel welcome, and we're looking at our policies and programs and hiring practices and all of that to make sure that we are achieving the goals related to DEI. And then I'll just say that, part of the challenge, I think, as an administrator in navigating some of these conversations is that we are not the elected officials. And so being in the middle, right? And navigating these conversations, hearing people out, framing up messages and information for our elected officials so that they can see this from different viewpoints as they consider bringing forth, goals or policies on behalf of the city. And so that's the role that I've played related to DEI.
Thank you for sharing that, Ingrid. So Artie, I want to ask you about your city, which was my first city in public service.
Okay.
As a entry-level management analyst.
Okay.
in my career. But the community of Inglewood has changed dramatically, and it is a majority minority community today. So are the issues different there for you as a city manager in navigating conversations?
Creating a white, more dominant upper class, quote unquote, race.
I'm sorry, I
What was
don't
it?
know where that was coming from. Are the issues different for you as a leader in your community around some of these conversations related to some of the societal issues that we've been facing?
No, they're all, we're experiencing the issues just like any other city. But like you said, we are predominantly city of color, Black and Hispanic. And so I think the major issue that I have is that because of the perception that public safety has these days, because of what we've experienced over the last forever, basically, the popularity of going into public safety has waned. And so we're having a difficult time attracting officers in general, like a lot of cities are, but particularly officers who are African American. It's just not, in our culture, in our city, where there's mostly, African Americans and Hispanics, a lot of people aren't encouraging their kids to go into public safety. They see that as the institution that is not for us. And so that's difficult. And when anything happens, as you know, in our community, the community wants to know, what are we doing to respond to address issues of the world and of the country, I should say. And it's not as challenging as it might be in a predominantly white community. I mean, there's just, everybody understands, gets it, and they're willing to come to the table to work out whatever we need to do to do our part to address racial inequities and unrest in cities throughout the country.
So we're getting close to our closing, but I have one last question that I'm really interested in having you share about. So many of you have heard me at one time or another talk about the fact that people need to see who they can be. And obviously all of you as leaders in our profession have created a view for others to aspire to what you do. So from your vantage point, where do you feel that local government is going to be going for students and early career professionals who are of color, Black professionals? Do you think that the future for them in our profession is even better than it was for you starting out? Kurt, let's have you comment.
With absolutely no question. It's not that, so the people who come before us and hopefully us are now paving the way for other folks. So that growth continues. So I think, yes, it will continue to get better for them. But I don't mean that to say that they're not going to have any issues. They're going to have whatever the issue of the day is. They're still going to have the same number of challenges. But I think the work of a lot of people over a lot of generations have really paved the way to make things so much better for them. And I think for many of those folks, they're so used to having to work twice as hard just to sort of play catch up, that if we can hand them off something that is a nice, even level playing field, and they continue to outwork everybody else, they're going to grow the profession in ways that it's difficult to imagine.
So Ingrid, as part of a much more diverse generation of leaders in local government, what do you see as the future for those who are entering the profession or are early in their careers?
Sure. As Kurt shared, just we have paved the way. And I think that there are so many more opportunities today than there were when I initially started out in local government. And, I think it's incumbent upon all of us who sit in the city manager, assistant city manager, or other roles to be actively engaged and involved in professional organizations, particularly the student chapters, really promoting local government as a career of choice and how we can make a difference in our communities. Anecdotally, I think I've seen like a decrease in the number of people applying for positions and the interest in local government. And to me, that just tells me more that I've got to be out there. I have to promote this profession, be actively engaged. And also, I'm hoping that by doing that, students are also becoming more actively interested and involved and engaged in local government. I think Troy mentioned early that local government is where it's at. And that's where you can really make the, I believe, a more tangible difference in the lives of others. And oftentimes there's nothing wrong with state or federal government. They're not, discounting that experience. But if we can do more to attract young professionals to this profession, the opportunities to grow and flourish here are plentiful.
Troy, the final word.
One of the things I got to do as ICMA president was go almost all around the world, but really around the United States. And I would tell you, I have been impressed at what I see at the next generation level. There are a number of students out there that are fired up about local government and getting involved in it. I think that the opportunities, like Kurt said, will be way more plentiful than when I started in it. We are doing work that doesn't have job titles right now behind it. We are evolving. I mean, we're coming up with chief people officers, information technology specialists to do social media management, engineering work that happens outside of the engineering department. I think the sky's the limit for local government, and there's a tremendous opportunity. Be it on this call right now or not, I know there's a whole pipeline full of really strong professional students that are stepping into this profession today that make me feel good about it tomorrow. I've seen it, and I have no doubt that there will be way more opportunities than it was.
And with that, I want to thank all of you for this insightful conversation this afternoon, and I want to turn it over to Pooja.
Thank you so much to Pat, Kurt, Ingrid, Artie, and Troy. I encourage those that are here in the audience, if you want to drop a note in the chat for our panelists and moderator. We are very grateful at the Davenport Institute for the opportunity to host this space and welcome you all here. Thank you for an enlightening, enriching conversation. Thank you notes are starting to pour in. Thank you so much to our audience that has been here. I am just going to say that at the Davenport Institute, we are all focused on local government. It is at the heart of everything we do. And that's why we wanted to host this event. You will see Linda Havard, our administrative coordinator, drop into the chat our link to our newsletter. If you would like to subscribe, it's the place to get all the information about Davenport happenings, updates, new projects, etc. And I will leave you with one last bit, is next month, we will be hosting a Women's History Month event. More news to follow, and we hope to see you there. Thank you to our lovely panel.